I'm Joe Meade.
I'm Rick Gordon.
And this is Rick. And we are ice boaters. We are not presenters. So we're just going to make this up as we go. Don't hold it against us. So we're going to give a presentation on the basics of ice boating. What is ice boating? And then we're going to go into a little bit more, or depending on what you guys want to talk about, we could open it up and talk about anything, our experiences, or that sort of thing. So
You feel free to ask questions as we go. It'd be much more fun if we talk about what you guys want to talk about as we move along.
And if we get annoyed, we'll stop you. So one thing we're not going to talk about, ice boating is a dangerous sport. And you're on the ice, you're going at high speeds, lots of things that can happen. We're not going to talk about ice tonight. We're not going to talk about ice safety. We're not qualified to talk about how thick ice should be and all that stuff. It's a risky sport. And when you walk away from here, just understand that.
There are some great websites that talk about ice, how to recognize good ice, bad ice. Do you have the handout?
I do have a handout. It actually has a whole bunch of websites on it.
Yes.
Different clubs and ice conditions and learning about ice, forums and things. So I'll put those right up here in the center, and people can grab them as they want.
Lake Ice is a really good website that talks about the quality of ice and how to recognize different types of ice and so forth.
Okay, so we thought we'd start out with a little ice boating 101. What is an ice boat? Different types of ice boats and classes. How this particular ice boat, which is the largest, most common class in the United States and actually the world for ice boats, how it got started and became popular. A small history of ice boats in the Finger Lakes that we can talk about. I've only been doing this for 5 or 6 years now, and Rick maybe 3 or 4 years.
3 years.
So there's a lot of history here that I'm still continuing learning as well, and maybe there's some people in this room that know more about it than I do.
How many people have ice boated here in the room?
Somebody
Have ice boated. How long ago, Bill?
Oh, probably 49.
1949? Very cool.
How about softwater sailing? Show of hands. Okay, so most people have some experience with it. Okay, all right.
Soft water and hard water.
Yeah, hard water. Once you start ice boating, there is a difference.
There's a vernacular.
Yep. And I threw some slides in on building an ice boat. I built this one myself. It's a fun project. It's a challenging project. You learn a lot of things as you do it. And just some things that go along with ice boating, what to wear, what not to wear, as you get started in the sport. And then we thought we'd talk about what an ice boat race looks like and what the upwind and downwind and different tactics and strategies and things like that. So what is an ice boat? This is an ice boat. An ice boat typically has 3 points that it rests on. We forgot to grab the ice boat skates, but it's got 3 skates. They're sharpened to a 90-degree point, which is very sharp. If you run your finger hard enough, you could probably cut yourself on it. It's not knife blade sharp. It's got typically a plank across the back for stability, and because of the ceiling in here, we couldn't put the mast up, but just like any other boat, it's got a mast and a sail and a boom. The sail is a lot flatter than your traditional soft water boats because these boats go at such high speeds. There's so much drag that you want to minimize that. So how does an ice boat work and what makes it go? And one of the neat things about an ice boat is in a 10-mile-an-hour wind, you can go 40 miles an hour. And how does that happen? It happens with what's called a parent wind. And people who have sailed before are probably familiar with a parent wind. But if you haven't sailed before, you're still familiar with it if you've ever ridden a bike. Okay, so the way it works, let's say the wind's coming in our face, right, like this, 10 miles an hour. Actually, I'll go like this so you can, okay, the wind's coming in your face, 10 miles an hour, you're standing here, you feel 10 miles an hour wind, right? You start riding a bike, and you start riding it forward, now you're going 10 miles an hour on the bike. How much wind do you feel in your face? 20 miles an hour, right? So there's so little friction with the ice boat. As you build that apparent wind, now you've got 20 miles an hour of wind going across the sail. You can go even faster. And eventually, you limit out because of drag, because of the air and friction of the ice and everything kind of takes over. But that's the general principle behind it. You kind of take the wind and take the ice, the blades on the ice, and you squirt out like a watermelon seed. So these boats here will top 65 miles an hour, maybe 70. You start to get the speed wobbles around 65. And the bigger boats, though, they'll top out just over 100 miles an hour. And there's unspoken records of 150, 160 miles an hour, but I think actually recorded is someplace in the 120 mile an hour range. So.
Yep.
Questions?
There's only one blade in the front.
One in the front.
Yes, that's
And actually, that's a steering blade. So this is your tiller.
One blade steer.
So you can turn that blade as you. That's your rudder.
yep. As we go into types of ice boats, which I believe is next,
Yeah.
the very first ice boats that started had the rudder in the back. So it's kind of backwards to this. It had a plank up in the front for stability and rudder in the back. And that was really because that's how traditional boats steered.
They took a boat hull and they made an ice boat out of it. So they had a rudder in the back already. They welded a skate to it and put a plank in the front.
But basically, you're laying down or sitting up in the cockpit, and you've got one hand on the tiller, and you've got one main sheet, just like sailing a sunfish. And that's all you have. If you want to stop, you turn upwind and you let the sail out. You want to go fast, you turn into the, with the wind and you pull the sail in. And you want to look ahead about 300 yards.
And where's the brake?
You want,
Right here.
you want to look ahead about 300 yards.
Hopefully.
Yes.
Hopefully.
So-
yes, sir.
Why is there an advantage to having the steering in the front instead of the stern?
Stability.
Stability. Your weight in this type of a boat is in the rear, so you have more weight. As the boat loads up in heavy winds, you'll notice if you were watching the videos, this plank will actually invert. Okay, and as you get puffs of wind, the plank will invert further. So that gives you stability. When we're going downwind and trying to turn, you'll notice in the video that we scoot our weight forward in the boat. We'll be laying down where most of our weight is here. When I want to turn, I scoot forward in the boat, trying to get a little more weight over that. Otherwise, I'll turn this and the boat will just keep going straight.
So talking about types of ice boats, and this will help answer the question, talking about stern steers, which is the first types of ice boats that came about with the steering in the back, and they typically had a basket in the back that you sat in, and the sail plan all up front. This one in particular has a main and a jib. Most of the stern steerers did, but some also just carried one sail. But what would happen is, as you get going with the weight of the person in the back, it's just like a pendulum, and as soon as that back steering runner got off the ice and slid a little bit, you just fly out of the boat and go slipping across the ice like a pendulum. So going to this method solved that. So stern steers have been around for centuries. Some of their masts are 40 feet tall. They're some of the biggest boats around.
Yeah.
And they're very fast, but they're very dangerous too.
These were developed in the 1600s, were the first ice boats that we read about.
The next type of ice boat that was developed after the stern steers in the early 1900s was the Skeeters. And the Skeeter design is more of a formula design where you have to stay within a certain guidelines. So a certain amount of sail area, a certain length, certain height, and all that stuff. And there's different classes of Skeeters. This is one of the classes. It's a C class. It's the smallest class. And within that class, there's a couple one design boats, which mean all the boats are exactly the same. So if people want to race a one design boat, there's no advantage to having a better built boat over another one. If they're going to race in a formula or box boat, then somebody might have a little bit better mast, somebody might have a better sail, somebody might have a bigger boat, a smaller boat, and the design comes a little bit more into it. So the J14, where you sit behind the sail here, is a type of C-class Skeeter. And this is one called a Whiz that you can see they're actually kind of sitting down inside, but it's got a pretty tall mast. The Night Ice Boat is a two-person ice boat, and it's a pretty big class. I think there's close to 1,000 night ice boats in the U.S., so it's got as far as ice boats go, that's a fairly good size. A little bit smaller than the first two, but it's still considered a C-class Skeeter. So it can race against other C-class Skeeters, but it also will race in its own division for nights. And that one's actually a fiberglass hull. This is a Renegade. It's been around since around the 40s, I think, is when it was designed. That's also a C-Class Skeeter. A little bit bigger sail plan. You can see it's got a springboard. It's got a wider plank than something like this, so it's a much smoother ride. The wider stance makes it a little faster, and of course the bigger sail makes it a lot faster. This is a Class B Skeeter, so you can see they're getting a little bit bigger in size. One of the requirements of a Class B Skeeter is it needs to be a two-seat boat. So both these types of boats, the Boatcraft and the Yankee, you can take a passenger in, so they're side by side.
So some of these Skeeters, you'll notice the distance from skate to skate on this boat is 8 feet. Some of these Skeeters, that's 22 feet, to give you a little bit of scale on how big these boats get.
Now the big boys, the Class A,
There you go.
this is where the money's spent. This is where the carbon goes, and the fiberglass, and you can see the bubble tops. They look like fighter jets. And these are the ones that are the true development class, and they're keep going faster and faster. And if anybody watched the last America's Cup race, a lot of technology comes out of these types of sail plans, the flatness of the sails, and how ice boats operate and move downwind as well as upwind.
And they're starting to use wings instead of sails, like you see in the America's Cup.
I'm asking, is that a wing or is that a sail?
That's a sail. The
That one's a sail.
A requirement of the Skeeter class is it has to have a cloth sail.
No, it does?
But it also has a winged mast. So the mast could be, 1.5 foot wing section, and then a small sail, and they can bend that in different ways, and so. Okay, now this is outside of the Skeeter class. This is the Aero class. It's a fiberglass hull. It's a two-person side-by-side boat. There's a few people in our club that sail these boats. It's just a little bit bigger than this, maybe. Another 15% larger than this
Yeah,
boat
this
here.
is a 12-footer. That's maybe a 16-footer.
Yep. This is a different type of boat. It's called a ice scooter, and it was really developed in New Jersey for hunting and fishing. And basically, they had these boats that they hunted and fished out of. And when the ice came, they put sails on them to maneuver over the ice and through the water and back onto the ice again. So there's still some following of that type of ice boat today. There's no rudder on it. There's no tiller or anything. They steer it with the jib and the mainsail. And I don't know, I'd be pretty white knuckled, I think, going over open water and then back onto ice and not
Never seen one. I don't think I want to.
Oh, there you go. And this is the Opti class. This is a little bit smaller than DN. It's actually developed for kids, for youth. It's a stepping stone up to a larger boat. This is a very, very powerful boat. I'm a pretty good-sized person, and this can fling me out 200 yards down the ice. So they take an actual Opti sail plan, which is a youth-sized boat. That's the actual sail from soft water, and basically put it on a downsized DN. And then, of course, there's the DN ice boat, and this is the most popular, largest class in the U.S. It's built to tear down and transport easily and be a one-person craft and something you can build in your basement. And that's why I got its start. So, questions on types and classes of ice boats?
One question. What's the price once you start with?
Well, you can pick up a old used DN ice boat. In fact, somebody here might have one for sale. In the, I'm going to say $800 to $1,000 range, maybe $1,200. And then, from there, it goes on up depending on how old it is, the quality of it, what kind of condition it's in. But, if you're looking for something to take up on Juanita Lake or up to Kenyon when the ice freezes and bomb around on, that's a perfectly good option. When you get into racing, or you can see some of these masts have a lot of bend to them. They're fiberglass composite masts. The typical boats that you'd buy that I just talked about in the $600 or $800 to $1,200 range are going to have a wood mast. They're built in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, even going to the 80s. And when the composite technology came about, they found they could bend the sails, bend the mast, which bends the sails and flattens the sails and just kicks you into a whole other gear. So when you're stepping up to that, you might have that $1,200 boat. Now you want to put that mast on it. You're going to spend $1,000 to $1,500 on that. When you get into racing, for a high-end racing package, I mean, you're anywhere between, you're going to start at $5,000, maybe $4,000, and you're going to go right on up to $20,000. You know, as you add different types of runners and different masts and sails and all the consumables.
And that's with the DN model.
That's just with the DN.
the DN.
Now the DN is really, it's not a one design, it's a formula, it's a box, but it's a very strict scantlings on the design of it. So you can make small changes, they're very customizable. A big guy like me can pair a nice mast with proper plank and everything and the right runners, or a small guy could do the same and we could both be very competitive.
So Joe introduced me to the sport 3 years ago. Let me sail his boat amazingly because it's a beautiful boat. I was lucky I didn't break it. A month later, I bought my own first DN for $1,500, found it down around the Philadelphia area. Figured out I couldn't even come close to keeping up with them. So the following year, I upgraded to a better boat for $3,500. I'm not sure what I'm going to do to try and keep up with them now.
Yeah. What really costs some money on these, again, is the mast and the runners. There's all sorts of different types of runners for different types of ice. There's long runners that are called insert runners. There's short, tall runners that are for snow, and everything in between, slush runners and thicknesses.
I was going to say, is there a better temperature to run, better conditions?
You know, if it's really hard ice and it's really super smooth, I would use these types of long runners.
Isn't all ice hard?
No, the Eskimos have like 80 some words for snow and ice, so you know, the different types, right?
And some of these guys that show up at these races that we go to show up with 12 different sets of runners, depending on what the ice is like. I have 2 sets. Joe, how many sets of runners do you have, Joe?
I decline to. Yeah. I plead the fifth.
It's like racing shoes, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Where do you race?
Well, locally around here, we're going to talk about the Kaiwasa Club in a little bit, but here we'll start out usually on Juanita because it freezes first, or Lamoka, and then as New York State freezes, you know, we'll go to Kenyon and Kaiwasa Lake and Canandaigua Lake, and we'll scrub race between ourselves and just have fun. But Rick and I will go to the Easterns, which last year was on Lake Champlain. Actually, the past 2 years it's been on Lake Champlain, but it might be all the way up to Maine or New Hampshire. We're going to go out to the North American Championship next week. We're leaving Saturday. We don't know where it's going to be yet.
They're still looking for
because the
ice.
entire Northeast just had this huge snowstorm. Everybody's out looking for ice, and conditions change by the minute. And that's just the nature of ice boating. You've got to be willing to drive if you want good ice. If you stick around at home, you might sail once a year. If you're willing to drive a little bit, you know, you could sail a number of times a year.
So right now you've got 60, 70 guys wondering where the race is. It starts next Monday.
And we're leaving Saturday morning.
So we're all checking our email.
There's stories of it being called on in, let's say, Minnesota. So everyone heads that way. And halfway there, it gets called off because they have a snowstorm, and everyone heads out to Montreal. And they get a phone call there, and now they're heading to New Hampshire. And then at the end of the whole thing, they're back in Minnesota where they originally started. So it's a very stupid sport. if you walk away with one thing, it's a stupid sport. But it's fun. When it's good, it's good. When the wind is up and the ice is hard and fast, it's a lot of fun.
We just checked the email, and there's potential sites from Vermont to Traverse City to Wisconsin. So one of those places.
Okay. So I did touch a little bit on the history of ice boats as I went through it, but the timeline starts out, as Rick said, in the 1600s, and I don't know how much documentation there is there, but people used it to move goods and things across the ice and get from place to place.
So waterways were a big part of the transportation system. So when it froze up, you still needed to move goods.
In the 1800s, especially on the Hudson, is when the stern steers really got their start. And there's all sorts of stories of them racing locomotives up and down the Hudson because they were the fastest. Ice boats were the fastest thing at the time. And to beat then they came out with the locomotives, and to beat a locomotive, you're doing pretty good. In the early 1900s, like we said, they went from the stern steers and changed it to the Skeeter class and a more similar design to this. In the 1930s is when the DN was developed, which Rick is going to talk about in a minute.
Oh, good.
Yes. The 40s, the Renegades, the Aeros and Knights in the 60s, and in the 1980s, everything changed with the composites and the carbon fiber and the fiberglass and everything else. And of course, today, everyone's just constantly pushing the envelope. So the DN, the Detroit News Story. How did this boat get its start, Rick?
The Detroit News Story. Back in the 30s, during the Depression, only the wealthy and the famous seemed to have ice boats. And the Detroit News put together a contest to design an ice boat that was affordable, that could be built in your garage or your basement, and it was transportable on the roof of your car. They literally brought 50 people into the basement of the Detroit News in their woodworking shop, and they all, for a cost of $32, I think it was,
Yeah.
they were allowed to spend to build an ice boat. And they were building these things out of cloth sails. They were stealing parts out of the junkyard from Model Ts for steering rods and things like that. And they put all these ice boats together and they went out and they sailed them. And of course they destroyed them all because they all broke with the heavy winds and so forth. And they came back the next year and they refined the design and a little more. And now the ice boat, the DN series, is now a one design boat that is the most popular ice boat model, if you will, in the world. Both in the US and in Europe. So there are world championships now. Where last year Joe and I sailed in the world championships up in Kingston, Ontario. I think we had 8 different countries represented there.
I didn't count, but
Yeah, I think that's what they said
Okay.
during one of the presentations. So these guys from Europe come over and they sail with us here, and we had 5 or 6 guys from New England go to Europe this year and sail in the Worlds over there. So I think there's about 5,000 of these worldwide of this
Yep.
series of ice boat. So it's very easy to find guys with DNs to go sail against, where some of the other classes, there aren't as many boats, it's tougher to get those types of races organized and so forth. The DN 60, the 60 indicates 60 square feet of sail area.
Okay.
Yep.
Good. I didn't get any good pictures of some of the older style ice boats, with the wood straighter masts and taller rigs for comparison purposes, but you can see, between this picture and then the newer pictures, the newer rigs with the bent masts again and the bent planks. And just to get a little bit more into what that does, I talked about flattening the sail and speed, where the older rigs would go 45 miles an hour and wind would hit and the boat would hike up and you have to let the sail out, and that's about as fast as you could go. What happens here is you get hit with a gust of wind, and rather than the boat heeling up, the mast just absorbs it, which flattens the sail and makes the sail more efficient. The plank absorbs it and pushes the boat down on the ice, and you gain about another 15 miles an hour where you wouldn't with the older rig. So it's just amazing how much these boats have changed.
You notice how those planks are inverted from the force of the wind pushing down on the hull.
So these planks probably start out with 2.5 inches of crown, like this, and they're going the other way. So they're flexing quite a bit.
Is that a laminated plank?
Yeah, I'll show you some pictures of my build, but this is actually ash strips, about 1.25 inch ash strips going across, and then it's got redwood strips in the middle, and then ash on the bottom again, and it's all epoxied and glued and sandwiched together and laminated together. So,
And planks are designed for a certain amount of flex based on your weight. So for Joe to build a plank for me, I'm a little bit lighter than Joe. He would build a plank that was not quite as stiff as he would build for himself. So you get the right amount of flex in the plank when you're sailing.
there's formulas on what types of wood and what your outer skins want to be and your inner skin, and you put it all together and kind of hope it comes out right, and then you get the sander out and you start going to town and make it the right stiffness. And if it gets too soft, you put a little fiberglass or carbon on the bottom of it and you stiffen it back up again. So one of the main things is, and the reason I did it in strips, is you don't want it to twist like this. You want it to bend perfectly flat. And by taking the strips and flipping them around and all the grain working against and with each other, it helps hold it straight. So
You want your runners perfectly parallel to within a couple thousandths of an inch. So when that plank inverts like that, when it inverts, the runners twist a little bit, they're no longer parallel. So you want a plank that as the plank inverts or bends, the runners stay parallel all the time. Because when they're not parallel, you're taking speed off.
So, history of ice boating in the Finger Lakes. This is the crowd participation point. When you guys just jump in and tell us what we don't know, because I know very little history of ice boating in the Finger Lakes. I know a little bit about the Kaiwasa Club. I know that my grandfather ice boated in it before I got into ice boating. I know that there's some stern steers and things that were on the lake. So this is actually a picture from Keuka Lake. I don't know what these boats are. I don't know where the picture was taken from, but it's out of a history book on Keuka Lake that I found.
Gibson Landing.
Okay.
That's in front of Gibson?
The old Gibson Hotel is there on the right.
Okay.
And
Do you know what the names of the boats are? Were you there?
no, I just know the picture. I've seen the
Okay.
picture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you imagine how heavy that sail is if it's canvas?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, that has to be
I mean,
nowadays everything's nylon.
this can be scary. That's ridiculously scary.
Yeah. The size of that sail too. It's amazing. So one stern steer that I do know about that's still in existence is the Great Western, and these are two pictures that were given to me. Both said this was the Great Western. I've looked at the pictures very carefully, and I'm not sure they're the same boat. This one is actually a postcard from Keuka Lake, and this one, I don't know where it was taken, but it was given to me, and it said that was a boat that was on Keuka Lake. So this is probably Glenn Curtis in a different type of ice boat testing out a motor, but I threw it in his other ice boats. This is a picture from the Kaiwasa Ice Club. The Kaiwasa Ice Boat Club started in 1957, and it was named Kaiwasa because of Keuka, Juanita, and Celebria. And legend has it that the group would start out on Celebria because it was the first to freeze, which I don't know how, it's such a small lake, or pond even, I don't know how you'd ice boat on it. I think they were more at the Moonlit Inn, was it? Or the
Yeah.
and then they moved to Juanita, and then eventually to Keuka as it went on. And they hosted some regattas and things. I think it was pretty active throughout the 70s. And talking to my father, he remembers it when he was a kid, but when the family started skiing and doing other winter activities, he said that's about when things started to slow up for the club, and eventually I think it just dwindled down to nothing. It takes a few people that are really into it and interested to keep the whole club going. So when I got my inaugural ice boat ride in 2010, I said, wow, this is great. How come nobody else is doing this? And we started to sail together, and more people would come, and then we started a mailing list, and then we'd see people on the lake, and they get on the mailing list, and we do things like this, and now we've got, 50-some people on the mailing list. And a good weekend, no matter where we are now, would have between 15 and 20 boats there, which 5 years ago was 2 boats. So, it's good. It's fun to get out, and I think people are getting back into it. And
Yeah, I mean, we get
enjoying it.
together, you have 20 boats out there, you have a little cookout out on the ice, you do a little sailing. It can be a very social thing.
This is just an article from 1962 that Juanita Lake was a backup to the International DN Regatta, which these boats now so fast, there's no way that you could do a regatta on Juanita Lake. But I don't know if it ever happened or not, but it was picked, and this article kind of leads to everybody was on their way there. So that was kind of neat. Here's another one from 1967 where, again, on Juanita Lake, the Kaiwasa Ice Boat Club was going to host an international event. This is a picture in front of Snug Harbor, and I kind of guessed at the year because I couldn't quite read what the crest said. It's 1960, early something. But all the boats lined up there for, I don't know if they were scrub racing, having fun, or what they were doing. But last year when Keuka Lake froze over again, we were fortunate enough to drag all our boats out and line them up in front of Snug Harbor again and take a picture. And we were pretty proud of that as a group. One of the neat things is these 2 boats, the first 2 boats are the same 2 boats here. So
Sail numbers.
sail numbers. Well, one of them's the same
One's
boat.
the same boat, yeah.
This is just some pictures from Juanita Lake. That one's up by Keuka College from the past couple of years. This was out in front of the Swits 2 years ago. You can see Rob Kenyon's airplane on skis back there.
He was just out flying around, saw us sailing, thought he'd stop in and say hello. Landed his plane.
So so what did we do? Like any good ice boater would do, we put a helmet on his head, stuck him in a
That's
boat,
right.
pushed
We
him off,
set
and
him-
said good luck.
We set him sailing.
Let the sail out if you get going too fast.
He didn't let me fly his plane though.
Yeah. What's up with that?
I don't know.
So, building a DN ice boat. Before I get into that, any questions on the Kaiwasa Club, or does anybody have anything more to add? I don't know about Ed. I know your brother was very involved in it. You know, and every little bit of history I get, I try and write down and document and stick someplace. And as you can see, I don't have that much, but.
Joe, I think you should mention that you have a workshop at the Boating Museum in December or November.
Yes.
There's one coming up this year if people are interested in just more hands-on.
Yep.
The guys get together and talk and
Yep.
do their thing.
Yep. We have an ice boat swap meet clinic, coffee hour, whatever you want to call it, every November at the Boat Museum before the season starts. And this year we had 20-some people. I think last year we had 40-some. I think it depends on what's going on that weekend. Everyone's getting Christmas trees or what they're doing. But
You left with the museum the apparatuses to align your motors?
the Kaiwasa Club has kind of made the Finger Lakes Boat Museum our home base. You know, there's a nice workshop at the museum. You can come in, bring your boat in. There's a liners there that we've kind of donated to the museum. Other small tools and things, and I think as we continue to grow and acquire more things, we might continue that pattern. So, yeah. Okay, so building an ice boat, which the Boat Museum would be a great place to build an ice boat if anyone was interested. But I built a boat. These are the DN class plans. There's 4 sheets to it. There's a lot of information on the internet on tips and tricks and problems and how to build it. But it's a fun project. It's a relatively easy project if you're a little bit handy, and there's a lot to learn, and you really don't need a lot of tools to do it. And it's a very rewarding project to actually take this thing and put it on the ice and then sit in it for the first time and wonder if it's going to fly apart in a million pieces or if it's going to go. And you know, the design, it's amazing. This thing is like a guitar. This is 3mm plywood top and bottom, and then 5/8 inch Sitka spruce on the sides. There's really not much to it. It's structurally designed to be very strong and very light. This boat set up like this probably weighs 50 pounds, maybe 60 pounds.
There's not a screw, there's not a fastener in that hull.
No.
It's all glued together.
Except what's holding the hardware on.
Well, yeah, you see the hardware, but as far as the hull itself, there's no screws in that.
So what's it take to build an ice boat? If you're going to build a racing hull, top of the line, you want Sitka spruce, which is the sideboards, and that comes from California. It's a very straight, one of the strongest, straightest grain woods there are. It's rare. It's tough to get. It's kind of expensive. Okame plywood for the top and bottom skins, ash for the plank, and epoxy, just a 2-part epoxy, something like West System or equivalent. And this is what this boat looked like before it was a boat, just rough sawn lumber. Equipment you need: a planer, maybe a 12-inch planer is all you need, a miter saw, a table saw, a lot of clamps, a hand drill, and I didn't put on there, but what would be handy would be a bandsaw. So, you know, the design, the original intent of the DN ice boat to be built at home in a basement or garage is still true today. It doesn't take much to build a boat like this.
Right.
I think it probably took me 80 hours, you know, a few good weekends and a lot of nights and early mornings, and you know, when you get into the finishing process and the sanding and all that stuff, that takes the most time. But it's a nice size project because there's a start and a finish to it, and it's so short that it doesn't get pushed off and incompleted for eternity.
Why is it numbered 637? Does it have any meaning?
Different sail classes have different rules as far as numbers go. This one, you get assigned a number and you have it for life, and they pretty much assign, you know, the next number off the list. This number happened to be my grandfather's number, and after he passed away, I was able to go to the estate, get a letter, send it into the organization that does this whole thing, and then they granted me the the sail number. So I'm sailing with my grandfather's number. Rick's boat, you applied for a new number, and you are...
They gave me a choice of 15 or 20 numbers that I could select. So mine is 5498. So his grandfather was sailing long before I applied for my number, as you can see.
There's still a few boats around. I haven't seen any in the single digits, but there's a 44. There's a
60.
60. Yeah, there's a
John
few different.
Harper is 60.
Yep. So it's kind of
So
neat.
there's a class office that,
Yes. Yep. And that's on the handout there. It's the IDNIYRA, International D and Ice Yacht Racing Association.
Yes.
IDNRA.
like A Skeeter for starters.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they actually print this this publication called Think Ice that was put together. This, if you're at all interested in ice boating, this is just a wealth of information. And you can join this organization for like $25 or something. And this is part of what you get. But we could stand up here for 2 weeks and not tell you everything that's in this book. It's really, really good.
So
Low numbers you mentioned, they've been on 1E in Cuba.
no, there are a couple of guys that race all throughout North America. But
Your other beats.
Yes, there might be
Yeah.
a picture of Ron Sherry on here.
yeah,
44.
there are a couple of pictures. But Dave Farmer has Bob Cole's old ice boat, which is 239, 2 numbers different from mine. You see a lot of the old boats, and then there's a lot of hand-down sail numbers that come down. And not every boat has numbers on the side. If you're going to race, you have to have the numbers on the side.
And your numbers on your sail as well.
So I've got some pictures of actually building the boat, and this was bending the side, the back side there, which is a lot easier than it sounds. It was simply putting a saw cut right down the middle of the board, and then putting a piece of laminate in there and gluing it in that curve and letting it dry. That's just clamping it up against a form that I made. This is a picture of the inside, so this is where the floor is. And you can see that's all hollow. It's just 1/4-inch pieces of wood in there. And you can see the front's all open, just a few bulkheads in there, and that's it. And then this is putting the skins on. This is the plank. You see what I mean about clamps. You want to have a lot of clamps. But again, I made a jig for the plank with the crown that I wanted. And I probably put 3 inches of crown in it, and when I pulled it out of the jig, it sprang back to 2.5 inches, and that was perfect. So, and then of course the finishing and putting hardware on it.
So you're trying to build these as lightweight as possible, because sometimes you're racing in 25-mile-an-hour wind, sometimes you're racing in 5-mile-an-hour wind. Particularly in the light winds, a lighter boat is going to help you.
It's easier to build a light boat than lose 5 pounds.
Do they put you in classes based on your size, or?
No, but when they do have a race, which we'll get into a little bit, they have 50 boats in the heat. And there's a gold fleet. If you have 150 racers there, 50 boats in a fleet, so there's a gold fleet, a silver fleet, bronze fleet, and then they go down to aluminum and tin and dirt and whatever else. It's usually that, yeah, lead. And what will happen is you'll have the rank skippers, 38 of them, I think, automatically get into gold. And then they do a trial heat, and the top 12 out of the silver go up into the gold, and then they do the bronze, and then the top 12 out of the bronze go up into the silver, and that's how they divide it up. But no, size-wise, I can rig up my boat with a different mast and different runners and everything, and be competitive with somebody half my size. Now, in light winds, I struggle just like on soft water. I'm heavier, more displacement, more friction. But in heavier winds, I've got more weight to throw around. So, this was the first mast I built, and this is in the plans. It was actually, I don't know how well you can see it, but it's redwood sides with an ash nose and hollow in the middle. And this was a bendable, flexible mast, and put together, glued the 2 halves together, and then ferreted it basically with just a hand planer. Sanded it and wrapped it in fiberglass. And epoxied that, and that was a nice bendable, simple mast till I hit a little Tasmanian devil snow thing going around in the middle of the lake, and it shattered into pieces. Which is why you spend a lot of money for the composite mast, but they hold up. And The class went from the solid wood masts into the early 80s to the aluminum masts. And the aluminum masts were great, but they didn't have any bend to them. And if you tried to pull them too hard, they'd kink and they'd break. So then they developed this mast and sailed that through the early 80s until they started building the fiberglass and composite ones. So, but this is still a perfectly good mast to build. People still build these and sail with them. They do have a higher mortality rate.
It was funny. I felt very bad for Joe the day that his mast exploded. I said, "Oh, this is terrible, Joe. I'm so sorry." He says, "Are you kidding? This is great. I can build another one now."
You're not going fast unless you break something. That's my motto. I break a lot of stuff. And then the hardware setup, fitting it all out, and then, of course, the christening on the ice and the first sail. That's the most rewarding part about it. And someday, maybe when I build my next boat or someone wants to build a boat, I think the boat museum would be a perfect place to do that and showcase that and maybe do some classes around or something. But not committing to that. I'm just saying it out loud. That's all. I'm watching you, Nancy. Yeah.
The 2016 program's already in place.
Maybe after my kids graduate college. How's that? Okay, so to conclude the session, what to wear ice boating? You want to dress like you're going skiing. Long underwear, snow pants, jacket, but there's some additional things. This is an important one. Actually, these 3 items right here, ice picks, in case you do go in to help get yourself out with. You can pick onto the ice and pull yourself out. A whistle, so that people can hear you. And some people choose to carry a life jacket. In the early season, I have actually a float coat, so it's like a ski jacket, but it's got flotation in it that I wear. Depending on the ice thickness, and this is just my preference, I'll shed that and do others. But hand warmers, mittens work best because your fingers stay together. If you're sailing in 15-degree weather, going 60 miles an hour, wind in your face, the wind chill's below 0. So mittens keep your hands a lot warmer than gloves do. And I use liners. Goggles, helmet, face mask under the helmet, again for the wind, and some sort of traction. The pull-on ones for regular shoes, or a lot of people that race actually wear track cleats because they got the big spikes on them and you just get glued to the ice. And of course, proper undergarments. Now, when we're racing, we won't wear the big bulky jackets and the snow pants. We'll wear a tighter, almost like a bobsledder style suit or a ski racing suit. You got a lot more room in the boat. You can ferret yourself down. And think about if you're driving down the road at 50 miles an hour and you stick your arm out the window. All that wind pulls it back, and that's a lot of drag that you want to minimize. So that's part 1. Questions? Do we want to just take a quick 5-minute break, or you guys want to just keep going right through? Keep going? Okay. All right.
Perfect.
All right, so ice boating 202. So wanted to talk, what's a race like? What's actually sailing an ice boat like? How do you go upwind? How do you go downwind? How do you start? How do you turn the boat? How do you on a race course, how would you go around the marks? Which direction you go? All that stuff, right away rules. So the first thing I want to talk about, though, is racing. And Rick and I, of course, we like to go to races. We like to go to events. It's fun. Not everybody likes to race. Some people like to cruise. In fact, probably 10% of ice boaters race. The other 90% just like to get in and go bombing around the lake and everything. That's good. But there's a few reasons that I like to race, or at least set up a course and have everybody go around the marks. One reason is everybody's going in the same direction. So you minimize collisions, you minimize safety problems. The other thing is if you set up a course and you keep going around that same piece of ice over and over and over again, you have more confidence that piece of ice is safe. Most of the times over the past couple of years we've seen people get into issues is when they go off on their own, down the side of the lake, go exploring, and they will find the thin ice someplace. There's always thin ice. No ice is safe. So that's another reason to have a race course. And also, racing or just going around the course is the best way, I don't care if it's soft water or hard water, to really hone your skills of sailing. You can make a boat go upwind and tight to the wind, or downwind and downwind as fast as possible. that's really where you're learning. Anybody can go out there and reach back and forth, and it's fun, and you go fast. But you can really get some good skills by participating in just going around the mark.
And you learn your boat too. What adjustments you can make to make the boat point faster, go faster.
So to explain the experience of ice boating and how to ice boat, I'm going to do it in terms of a race. So this is a typical race course. I don't know if everybody can see it. Typically it's a mile long. An ice boat does about 3 laps. So that usually takes 15 minutes in an ice boat. So you're talking 6 miles.
Mile between your 2 marks.
Yep. So 3 laps would be 6 miles, and do that in about 15 minutes. Sometimes more, sometimes less.
So it's going to be a perfectly upwind, downwind course. See the wind direction here. Here's your starting line. So your boats will be ranked, if you will. So the number 1 seated boat will start here, and he will start off on port tack. And number 2 boat starts here. He starts off on starboard tack. Number 3 boat, number 4 boat, number 5 boat, number 6 boat, until you have 25 boats on either side of that starting point. So 50 boats is your maximum in a race. And all these guys are trying to be the first one around this mark. So imagine that this is a giant parking lot and you're all driving cars and you can only go at a 45-degree angle as you try to be the first one up to that mark. There's a lot of boats to keep track of, and you're all doing 50 or 60 miles an hour. So it can get pretty hairy.
That's what we like.
You start from a dead stop?
Start from a dead stop. I think Joe's got a slide coming up that shows the starting sequence. So you'll have a starter stand here and they'll drop a flag. And Joe, what's the next slide show?
You run like heck. One more point on this. Any time, whether you're on the ice or whatever, if you see a race course, same as soft water, they go counterclockwise. So you're always going around to the marks to the left. So you're going this way. Okay, that's what I do with this thing. All right, so the start.
Oops.
Okay, here's a starting line. This is a small picture, but you can see 50 boats lined up there. Probably in the back, it probably looks like a thin white line, but there's 50 boats there. Like Rick said, there's a guy, race committee standing there, and he drops the flag, and you start running. Boats are about 10 yards apart. So each boat is probably, I don't know, from Rick to myself right here. It's
you
probably
have about that much room in
spacing.
your starting gate, if you will.
I'm sure there's a specific measurement, but this is about how far it is. So,
This is actually a photograph in Kingston, Ontario at the World Championships last year.
so here's a picture of the start. So you've got this boat, it's stationary. The way that you want to start, let me get around the boat here. If you can picture this, you've got your mast going up, and there's 2 wires, side stays, that come up to hold the mast, okay? So the way to start is you grab the tiller with one hand, you grab the main sheet with the other hand, and you bring it in so the sail's just a little bit tighter than hanging down. And you grab the wire, the side stay with your other hand like this, and when they drop the flag, you just run, and step up on the plank, and then sit down in the boat and start trimming and sailing. One thing about an ice boat, if it's sitting here, even in wind, if it's just sitting here, and you sit down in it, you're not going to go anywhere. You've got to break that friction from the ice. So you have to push it to get it going. You have to start building that apparent wind to get the ice boat going. Maybe in a gale, you can sit there and it'll start moving, but it's a funny thing.
And oftentimes the boat will start to tip up, and you'll just have to step on the plank to keep the thing from flipping over and get in the boat.
The first time's the most awkward time. So most new people, I'll set them in the boat and I'll give them a good push, but I say that's the last push you're going to get, and if you stop out in the middle of the lake, good luck.
So you notice the pads here on the boat. That's because you're probably wearing spikes. So as you step on that plank to get in the boat, you don't want to ding up your boat with your track spikes. So most of the boats have pads there to protect the plank.
So once you're in the boat, and now you're going upwind, what you're going to want to do is just like a soft water boat, work the telltales, come up to wind, bring the sail in, and just pick up speed, and pick up speed, and pick up speed, and pick up speed. And once you're up to speed with a composite mast, you want to pull it in as tight as you can get it, which will bring the boom all the way to the back of the boat and start to bend that mast out, and that's when you kick it into 5th gear. Once you're under sail and you're moving fast, at that point you can get into the boat and kind of slide down towards the front of the boat. While you're getting up to speed, you want to have your weight towards the back because, like Rick said, it's going to heel up like this. So you want to counteract that until you get enough speed to take care of the puffs in the wind. So, and then once you're underway, though, get your weight forward so you're evenly dispersed on all 3 runners. Get down in the cockpit so that the wind's going over
The
you.
aerodynamic.
Trim hard. So once you get to the top of the course, you've got to go around the windward mark. Anytime, especially in an ice boat, when you turn perfectly perpendicular to the wind, you're the most vulnerable because you're going so fast that wind is coming. It's just going to want to take you and tip you right over. As you go around the mark, though, you keep the sail trimmed in very tight. As you go around it and start turning downwind, the faster you turn downwind, it's kind of funny. You've got some centripetal force, and it'll keep you down on the ice. And as the boat comes up, the faster you turn down, the faster you come back down the ice. It's a really neat feeling. You can see all 3 of these boats are turning into the wind, and you see they're all heeling up on their sides. But as they all turn downwind, they'll come back down again. If they didn't turn downwind and kept going straight, they'd probably all tip over. That's how to get around it fast. If you're not comfortable with that, or first time, you let the sail out and do your turn. The boat slows down, but there's nothing wrong with that. So this is just in a racing technique kind of thing.
So as you're making these jibes and tacks, you've got the boom all the way down on this deck, which means you're lying in the boat and the boom's pressing against your shoulder. And to get that boom to come across the boat, you're actually sliding your body forward and getting your head down lower so the boom can slide across your face and get on the other side, because you don't want to let the sail out and lose any speed. You want to keep the sail in as tight as you can keep it. So there's a hiking rack in the bottom of the boat. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a little contraption you can hook your heels behind so you can pull yourself forward in the boat, get your face under the boom so it can go across, and you can complete your maneuver.
So this is all crazy racing talk. If you're just out cruising, you don't have to worry about any of this stuff, but it's how to get around the course. And going around the windward mark will be about the fastest point of sail because it's kind of like a launching pad. As you turn that boat sideways, it just picks up more and more speed, and all of a sudden you're heading downwind and you're going with the wind and just flying. And that's about the best time.
The acceleration is quite exhilarating.
Yeah. Now, going downwind is tricky in an ice boat. If we all get back on the bike, and let's see, the wind was coming this direction, right? So now we're facing this direction, the wind's at our back. And we're riding that bike 10 miles an hour, and the wind's 10 miles an hour. How much wind do we feel in our face? We don't feel anything, it's 0, right? It nets itself out. Well, same thing in an ice boat. If you point an ice boat straight downwind, eventually you're gonna run out of that apparent wind. You're gonna run out of wind. So to sail an ice boat downwind, just like going upwind at 45 degrees, you have got to go downwind at 45 degrees to keep that wind going over the sail. And that's a tricky thing for anybody to learn. I see a lot of new people out on the race course say, man, how'd you catch that gust of wind? Or you guys go so fast downwind, how'd you do it? You got to turn and head up into the wind. If you stop, you actually have to take the boat and turn it upwind and go back upwind again and build up speed before you can go back downwind. It's a tricky concept. When the wind's up, it's a lot easier, but when it's light wind, it can be a big struggle.
I much prefer to push the boat only at the beginning of the race. There have been many times I've pushed it 3 or 4 times during a race.
Some races turn into a track meet. Going downwind, though, you want to get your weight forward over your steering runner. There's 44. Yeah, there's the 44.
You were asking about 44 earlier.
You want to have your weight forward. You want to be ready to hike out if the windward runner, or your runners come up, it starts to hike. And if it starts to hike, you simply turn down, and again, that centripetal force comes into effect and brings the boat back down, and you just go straight downwind. And if you want to slow down, you just go straight downwind, bleed off speed, and take it at your own pace. Now, the leeward mark rounding, just like the windward one, is you're the most susceptible to the wind coming at the side. But now you've also got all that speed coming from the downwind run. So you're going even faster, and it's even a little bit more hairy. So as you can see, this sailor here has put all of his weight up front in the boat to get the weight over the steering runner. He sat up to get even more weight over the steering runner, and he's let the sail out quite a bit. If you try and go around that mark with the sail tight, you're heading for disaster. And whether you're out cruising or you're in a race, anytime you're going downwind and you start to turn back upwind, that's probably about the trickiest point. Simply, if you just let the sail out, let the boat slow down, head straight downwind, let the boat slow down, let the sail out, you can turn back upwind. And then, of course, the finish. The finish is a downwind finish. Every ice boat races a downwind finish because it's too hard for the committee to have to move and everybody sail back and all that. Same principles as going downwind, and you just come across the line and then turn straight down. Usually in a race, there'll be what they call a safety zone, and you turn into that and just go straight downwind, past the pits, past everybody standing there until you bleed off speed and turn back around and come up and park your boat and get out. So that is a race. Any questions about technique going upwind or downwind or? Typically, what I'll do, I'll try and come about 100 yards from the mark and head straight downwind, and then start to come up and around in a heavy wind, so that I come up tight to the mark. So I'm going to say you need probably about a good 100-yard radius. If you try and jerk these things, you're gonna go for a ride. The skates are so sharp and they got so much grip. Yeah.
Are the stays loose?
So, well,
They're adjustable, actually.
In the older setups with a stiff wood mast, they would be loose because you want the mast to tip over when puffs of wind hit it, so that it depowers the boat. In these boats, you want them tight with the composite mast. So mine's probably like a high E or something like that, like a twang. If I step on the plank though, it'll slacken up. And when I'm under sail, the windward side is very tight, obviously. The other side is just hanging right down, very loose. So I think on the newer boats, you snug them up. On older style boats, you want a little bit of play. Out of the boat. Yeah, you can't, there's no way to adjust them when you're under sail. Yep. And they just, actually I got a set right here. They just have pins in them. And I use little quick pins. And on softwater boats, it's hard to see the subtle differences. On these boats, just a 1/4 inch of difference makes a big difference on sail trims.
When you make the turns going downwind, you bring the wind across the stern?
Yes.
Jive?
Yep.
Is
Yep.
that exciting or?
If you're going fast, it's hairy. When you're under sail and the mast is bent out, it's got a lot of down pressure on the ice, and your steering's a lot more responsive. Mm-hmm. When you turn straight downwind, it takes all that compression off the mast. The mast stands back up. When the mast stands back up, the sail gets fuller, which overpowers the boat. That to me is my scariest point of sail, is trying to kind of baby it around and get under the boom and go to the other side and slowly bring it back in. Yeah. If you twitch at that speed, you'll spin out very quickly.
Oh yeah. Actually, steering downwind with a tiller, I usually have the tiller between my knees, and I'm just the slightest little movement of your knees, because I'm not steady enough with my hand. I'm like, and that gets very scary.
But we make the boat go that fast because we want it to go that fast. Just sailing downwind, you can make it go as slow as you want. You can make it come to a stop if you want. You run out of that apparent wind. So, how low do you want to go?
Unlike softboard sailing,
That's right.
Yeah.
So walk back. Yep. There's another question somewhere.
Actually, I could,
Yeah.
how crazy would it be to sail with it too?
You can get a stern steer and sail with it.
You want another person? I only have two hands.
There are no of the modern style boats that have jibs, and I think it has to do a lot with drag and speed, you don't need it. I'm sure there's a more scientific reason for that, but that's what I've come up with.
You don't have a weather helm with these things.
Right. Unless it's one of those scooters, then that's all you have to steer with. Okay. Just to talk about right-of-way rules. All of the rules are the same as soft water. Starboard or report, if you're into that. The only differences is a boats going downwind must yield to boats coming upwind, just because of the speeds and the closing speeds. And when you're going downwind, in normal sailing, the leeward boat has right away and can pinch the other boat up. With the speeds here and the way the wind is, if you try and pinch an ice boat up, they're just going to tip over and run right into you and cause an accident. So those are the two differences in the right-of-way rules. And I can go into those more in depth if anybody has questions on it. But the biggest rule, and this is the one that we practice in our club, is the UTA rule, turn away. Just, these boats are so fast. We're not trying to win prizes. You don't use rules like you do in soft water sailing to gain advantages. It's just too dangerous. The biggest thing is just keep your head out of the boat and practice defensive driving. You might be right, but you might have a boat in splinters and you'd be in the hospital. So.
We'll do the same passing rules.
Yes. Yep. So going upwind, a starboard boat has right away over port boat.
Explains why your top rank boat starts on port.
Yeah. Yep.
Their first crossing, you'll be on starboard.
Yep. In the past couple of years, they've instituted darling marks. So you've got your upwind course straight up and down, and about 150, 200 yards upwind, they'll put a mark, and then one downwind, and you have to go around those and treat them like the mark. So that cuts people off from trying to get too close to that windward mark and flop around. And same thing at the leeward end, which is, that's where the most collisions are. So that makes people just give it a little wider. So it's right-of-way rules. And that's everything we put in there. So we'll open it up to any more questions people have, or it's actually pretty good. It was an hour or so.
I have one. Is it noisy?
Yes.
Yeah, we could play that.
Yeah, we could turn this back on here.
You can hear it. And it depends on the quality of the ice. If the ice is bumpy, it's noisier. If the ice is dead flat.
Is this as high as your volume goes? Yeah. I don't know if you can hear that, but we'll leave this playing here, and and you can hear the sound of the runners. And when a race starts, it's neat. It's totally quiet, and then all of a sudden everybody starts running. 50 boats start running. And it sounds like a stampede, and then the sound of the blades over the ice for the next 15 minutes is a pretty neat sound. So.
And there are rules. If you lose your wind in the middle of a race, there's time limits. That if you can't make a lap in a certain amount of time, the race is abandoned, and you wait for the wind to come up and you start a new race.
Yeah, you mentioned danger. I could see sharp blades being a factor.
Yeah.
I could see, do the boats come apart?
The boats actually pretty much explode. I'm serious. Out of all the racing and everything is done, I think there's only been 2 deaths in 100 years, which is pretty amazing, which is how dangerous this sport is. Safer than golf, right? With those statistics. But the neat thing is, when 2 boats hit, everybody seems to walk away, but the boats end up in splinters. And maybe it's because they're built like a guitar. I don't know what it is. The other thing about ice, you don't fall down, you fall out, and it's frictionless. So you just go skidding across the ice until you finally come to a stop, and hopefully not in front of a boat. There are rules on the bluntness of your runners and what the nose and the shape needs to be, and all of that. I think the most dangerous thing out of the whole thing is this right here. It's right in your face. And if this thing splinters off, it's a piece of metal.
I flipped my first boat, broke the tiller as I went over. I was sliding down the ice at 20 miles an hour. There goes the boat. There goes the tiller. Like, that's not good.
But you gauge how much speed and danger you want to take when you do it. If you want to go out for just a nice cruise, you can do it.
yeah.
You know, you don't have to pull the sheet in tight and you know, go all out. So
this is actually on Juanita last month. Doing a little practice run, trying to keep up with Joe.
there you can see him going around the leeward north there, sitting up, and now he's going to get back in the boat. Now he's going back upwind, trimming the sail in.
Very difficult to see because you're lying down in the boat and you got your chin like this trying to see what's going on. We have little contraptions tied to our helmets that pull our heads forward, otherwise your neck just loses it. And
The older boats, the boats you're going to find in the $800 to $1,500 range, the cockpits are a lot smaller, the seats sit up a lot higher, the rigs are a lot higher, they are more comfortable to sail. The racing boats, you know, if you're going to race, you're going to be uncomfortable. That's what this boat is. Now you go up into some of the bigger boats, the Knights, the Aeros, comfortable as to sail. The Renegades, you get in the boat. You know, you've got all that wind protection. The bubble boats, I don't know, those guys have heaters and TVs in them. I don't know.
some of those boats, the steering is with your feet. It's with foot pedals instead of a tiller like this.
That was on the stern series?
No.
No, that's on like your Skeeter class.
The Renegades have foot steering.
Renegades, yeah.
Other questions?
Looks like that was pretty good conditions.
Oh yeah,
That was a nice day.
yeah, lots of winds and smooth ice. When you get too much snow on the ice, when you become an
mast
ice
bending.
boater, you start paying attention to the weather and it drives you nuts. And every time there's a snow in the forecast, you can't sleep at night. You can ice boat in about 2 inches of nice new light fluffy snow. A couple of days it turns to cement. The saying is if you can run and slide and slide on the ice, you can ice boat. If you stick, you can't ice boat. And it's just like ice skating. If you can't ice skate on it, you can't ice boat on it.
Yeah. So you see my knees come up when I tack there. That's trying to get my head underneath that boom so we can go across and then straighten back out.
You got to be getting pretty close to the top.
Yeah,
mark here,
there
right?
I'm going to tack. Yeah.
And talk to us about why rig the sail so low? Why not put the sail another
Well,
6 inches up in the air?
so you've got the mast. The mast is flexible. Depending on how flexible it is, the lower you put the sail, the less it'll flex. The higher you put it, the more it'll flex. Also, if you have it up higher, the riding moment of the boat's more. So as you get hit with wind, now the wind's got more leverage to tip you over. So you want it lower. And there's also what's called like a platen effect, which kind of like an airplane wing on a fuselage. If you can get rid of that space there, there's a aerodynamic effect that comes from that, rather than have it go through. So those are some of the reasons why. An ice boat has a lot more rake. The mast is raked back a lot more than a normal sailing boat because of the speed. The sails are designed for that. There's the upwind marks. He's coming around.
Now I'm heading downwind. Pardon me?
He's probably doing 50.
Doing 50.
And when you're 6 inches off the ice, it's fast.
And you're not kidding.
No, I've never heard of ice boats in the Olympics, have you?
They've talked about over the years, the problem with ice boating is you can't guarantee a venue for it. You know, you can't have it in Beijing and then guarantee that you're not going to have to travel over to Switzerland to find a lake. So that's
You need about 2 miles
well, it'll be
square
a winter sport.
of good ice. To
Yeah, you
set
need
up
about
a course.
2 square miles of good ice.
4 square miles, but 2 miles by 2 miles.
Yeah. So, you know, any good weekend like this that there's not much snow around, it's frozen, we'll probably be up on Juanita. You know, most ice boaters are pretty good. Stop up and they'll sit you on a boat and push you off and give you a few pointers. It's worth doing. It's definitely worth doing if you've never done it.
Yeah, very exhilarating. You can go 10 miles an hour, and it's fun cruising down the ice.
My brother's home in ice boat that he did in the basement. There was about 15 at the time, 1960 something or other, and he was used to soapbox races.
Mhm.
So you have the thing in the front, and the thing in the back, and some old ice skates, hockey skates here and there.
There you go.
Of course, then you had trouble getting it out of the basement. So I had to dismantle it and come down the stairs. But he used to put that out on the ponds and,
Sure.
plays on an ice.
And we didn't show the home built class, but we've seen some neat boats from 2x4s and plywood to welded I-beams to everything. It's,
Just a T out of tube
it-
steel.
And it doesn't matter. Like I said, 10% like to race, 90% like to cruise, and everybody has their own thing.
As long
But
as it moved on the ice, it was good.
that's right. We all have fun, and we all share the same thing. So.
It's good to be outdoors on a winter day. Have fun.
I would imagine pressure
That's a great thing.
Pressure, yeah.
Yes, here I'm trying to get
one
slowed
thing we
down,
do is,
turned into the wind.
about racing, we scout where we're gonna race first
There we go.
before we go out on the ice, and that's a danger of cruising. Is if you're just gonna go down the lake, then you could run into that. But yeah, you don't want to go over pressure ridges. You stop the boat and you manually take it over.
We're just not going in.
Well, that's where Joe was.
I got there about 5 minutes earlier. Just saying. So we'll be around here for a few minutes. If anyone wants to come and check out the boat or talk or ask other questions, we're here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.